The skies above Asgard shimmered in a hue no mortal eye could fully name, an endless tapestry of molten gold fading into deep, sensual indigo. Here, in the eternal home of the gods, every breeze seemed to hum with a subtle music. Every drop of light seemed to linger upon skin as if reluctant to leave. But even in this realm where strength and beauty appeared unshakable, there was a quiet truth that only the most ancient among them dared whisper. The gods were not as eternal as they seemed. For all their power, they too had a hunger to remain untouched by time, a hunger to keep the curve of their lips youthful, their eyes bright with the fire of desire, and their bodies free of the weight that years could bring. And at the heart of this hunger was a single, irreplaceable treasure, Idun's golden apples. They were no ordinary fruit. To call them apples was almost an insult, for they were the distilled essence of life itself, drawn from the roots of Yggdrasil, the great world tree whose branches brushed the heavens and whose roots drank from the deepest wells of creation. They glowed softly, even in darkness, a warm light that seemed to pulse like a heartbeat. Their scent was intoxicating, something between honey and rain on warm skin, a fragrance that invited touch, that promised to dissolve the weariness of centuries. But one bite, and the gods could feel youth flood through their veins again, as if every cell of their being had been kissed awake. Faces smoothed, muscles strengthened, and the unshakable fire of immortality returned to them. But the magic was not permanent. The sweetness faded with time, and so the cycle began again, a quiet dependence that bound even the proudest of gods to the gentle hands of Idun. She was their keeper, the one who guarded the apples not with locks or walls, but with her own presence. There was something about Idun that went beyond beauty. She did not blaze like the sun, nor chill like the moon. She was spring itself. The air seemed softer when she entered a room. Her laughter carried the warmth of first blossoms after frost. When she held an apple in her palms, it was as though life itself bent toward her, eager to be kept safe. But even spring can be stolen.
In the quiet spaces between celebrations and battles, in the shadowed edges of Asgard's gleaming halls, there were whispers. Whispers that the golden apples were not unassailable. That there were eyes, hungry, covetous eyes, watching from the lands beyond. For who would not wish to hold youth in their hands, to taste eternity on their tongue, to keep desire from slipping away? Far beyond the walls of Asgard, the mountains of Jotunheim rose like jagged teeth into the heavens. In those cold, untamed peaks lived the Jotnar, the giants whose power was older than some of the gods themselves. Among them was Thjazi, a hunter whose hunger was not for meat or gold, but for what could never be freely given: the warmth of beauty, the control of time itself. He had heard of Idun's apples, and with each passing year, the thought of them grew sharper in his mind, like a blade slowly honed. And then there was Loki, the trickster, the silken voice in the shadows, the one whose loyalty was as shifting as smoke. To some, Loki was a companion worth keeping. To others, a serpent that should never be trusted. He too knew the power of the apples, not because he sought to consume them endlessly, but because he understood how desire for them could twist hearts, change fates, and set even the most careful plans aflame. Asgard itself seemed blissfully unaware of how fragile its perfection truly was. Feasts were held beneath banners of silver and gold. Mead flowed like rivers, music curled through the air, and the gods laughed with the careless joy of those who believe tomorrow will always be kind. Idun would move among them with her basket of apples, each one gleaming like captured sunlight, and hands, strong hands of warriors, delicate hands of goddesses, would reach for them with almost reverent eagerness. But the beauty of the scene was an illusion balanced on a knife's edge. For if the apples were ever lost, the gods would feel the first thread of time's touch. It would begin subtly, a hint of fatigue after a day's hunt, a faint line at the corner of an eye, a slowness in the turn of a head, the weight of armor feeling just a touch heavier than it once had. And with each passing moment without Idun's gift, the unraveling would quicken until their glory became a memory, and the memory turned bitter.
This was the unspoken truth. The gods were addicted, not in weakness, but in fear. Fear that the flame of their beauty, their power, and their desirability could fade. And in that fear lay danger, for fear makes even the wise act rashly. Desire, too, is dangerous. The golden apples were not only the promise of youth, they were temptation embodied. To look at them was to imagine oneself untouched by age forever. To imagine every caress always met with the same fervor, every glance always answered with hunger. They were the promise that no kiss would ever lose its heat, no embrace its strength. And that promise was enough to make allies betray each other, to make enemies risk everything for a single taste. Some say Idun herself did not fully grasp the weight of what she carried. To her the apples were a trust, a duty. She had been chosen to keep them safe, and in her heart she believed the gods' intentions were pure. Perhaps it was her innocence that made her so irresistible to those who would use her. Perhaps it was precisely because she trusted so easily that the story of her loss would begin. But for now, in this moment before the storm, she walked through the gardens of Asgard, sunlight falling through leaves in dappled patterns across her skin. Her basket was full, the apples glowing faintly as if they were aware of their own importance. She paused to breathe in the air, unaware that far beyond the shining walls, eyes were fixed on her, calculating, waiting. The wind shifted, carrying with it the faintest scent of frost from Jotunheim. It brushed against her cheek like an unwelcome touch, gone as soon as it came. Somewhere in the distance, a shadow passed over the bright sky. The day remained beautiful, but the first invisible crack had formed in its perfection. In the halls of the gods, laughter still rang. Yet in the unseen corners of the 9 realms, desire had begun to move like a slow, deep current, one that would soon pull Idun far from safety. And when that current reached her, the golden apples would no longer rest in the hands that had always kept them safe. They would be stolen. And with them, the very heartbeat of Asgard's beauty. The gods did not yet know it, but their most intimate, intoxicating treasure was about to be placed in the hands of one who saw youth not as a gift, but as a prize to be owned. The air grew a fraction cooler, though no one noticed. The feast that night would be bright, the apples sweet, but it would be the last feast of its kind for some time, for the hunger that had been watching from the edges of the world was ready to step into the light.
Idun's presence was like the moment spring finally dares to touch the land after a long, unyielding winter. Idun did not enter a room, she bloomed into it. Her hair fell like strands of ripened wheat brushed by sunlight, each movement catching the light as though it longed to remain in her. Her eyes were green, but not the cold green of polished jade. They were the living green of new leaves, of moss warmed by the breath of the earth. The curve of her lips held both youth and kindness, a softness that made even the most battle-hardened gods pause in their speech. She spoke rarely and listened often, but when her voice did spill into the air, it was like warm rain, gentle, cleansing, and impossible not to lean into. Idun's hands were her quiet magic. They cradled the golden apples with an intimacy that suggested not ownership, but devotion. She never held them carelessly. Even when she walked through the gardens with her basket swinging lightly in her grasp, she seemed aware of the pulse within each fruit, as if the apples themselves whispered to her. There was no arrogance in her beauty. She wore it as one wears the scent of blossoms, naturally, without thought of how it affects others. And yet, it affected everyone. The gods might speak of her as guardian of the apples, but in their private thoughts, many wondered if it was not Idun herself who was the greater treasure. Loki. If Idun was spring, Loki was the unpredictable wind that could scatter her petals or carry her perfume for miles. He was beautiful in the way storms are beautiful, dangerous, ever-changing, impossible to truly grasp. His hair, the deep copper red of embers in a dying fire, seemed to shift in hue depending on the light. His eyes were sharp, quicksilver gray, and they never truly rested. They drank in every detail, every weakness, every flicker of emotion on another's face. His smile was his most dangerous weapon, wide, inviting, and so often concealing teeth meant to bite. Loki's voice was silk woven over steel. It could comfort, seduce, or cut, and one could never be entirely certain which it was doing until it was too late. He carried himself with the confidence of one who knows that even the strongest walls have doors, and that he alone might know how to open them. The gods spoke of him with both fondness and suspicion. He was the companion who could turn a dull feast into a riot of laughter, or into a night of whispered accusations and sudden anger. He was clever, yes, but his cleverness was a double-edged blade, and he had no fear of cutting those who held it with him. Loki noticed Idun, not only the luminous softness of her beauty, but the way others bent toward her presence. He understood the subtle power she carried, the kind that made even the proudest warrior glance at her with something almost like longing. And Loki, who thrived on knowing the value of what others loved, stored that knowledge deep inside.
Thjazi. In the high, ice-bitten peaks of Jotunheim, Thjazi's figure cast a shadow even among giants. He was tall, broad-shouldered, his presence heavy as a winter sky before a storm. His hair was black as the deepest cavern ice, his skin pale with the faint glimmer of frost, as though the cold had claimed him as one of its own. His eyes were blue, not the cheerful blue of summer lakes, but the hard, clear blue of glacial ice that has endured for centuries. Thjazi was a hunter by nature and by craft. His gaze, when it fell upon prey, was unwavering. He moved with the patient assurance of one who knows that everything, beast, man, or god, can be caught if pursued long enough. When Thjazi first heard of Idun's golden apples, it was not their beauty that captured him, nor the promise of immortality alone. It was the thought of possession, of holding what no other could, of bending the light of youth and vitality to his own will. And when he imagined the keeper of those apples, the one whose hands and breath touched them daily, a hunger awoke in him. It was not love. It was not even lust in its pure form. It was the cold, consuming desire of the hunter who sees a rare, perfect creature and decides it must be his. His strength was immense, his cunning sharp enough to match some of the cleverest gods, and he had the patience to weave a plan that might take years to unfold. The gods. They were a chorus of radiance, each shining in their own way. Odin's commanding presence, Frigg's serene grace, Thor's thunderous might, Freya's burning allure. Yet beneath the layers of pride and power, they shared a truth they did not speak. Without Idun and her apples, all that beauty and vigor would crumble. They depended on her, quietly but deeply. Some hid their need beneath laughter and boasting, others beneath aloofness. But when Idun entered the great hall with her basket, they watched her hands, their eyes following the curve of each apple she offered. They reached for them with smiles, but the smiles were tinged with something else, a shadow of envy. For Idun never aged.
Even among immortals, her youth was unshaken. The gods, though renewed again and again by her apples, lived with the memory of what it was to feel the edge of time. And in their eyes, Idun was not only the giver of youth, but a living reminder of what could be lost if she or the apples were ever taken from them. They did not voice their fear. To speak it aloud would make it too real. But in the private chambers of Asgard, some wondered what they might do, what bargains they might strike if it ever came to saving her.
The threads between them. Idun's world was woven of trust. She believed the gods around her were bound by honor, that Loki's sly smiles were harmless mischief, that no giant's hunger could pierce the walls of Asgard. Loki's world was woven of opportunity. He saw in Idun not just a friend or fellow god, but a key to open desires far beyond his own reach. He would never harm her outright. That was not his way. But harm could be done through her, and if that harm served a greater game, he might not look away. Chiazi's world was woven of hunger. He did not see Idun as others did. To him, she was prey draped in light, keeper of a power he could not bear to live without once he had imagined it in his grasp. And the gods' world was woven of dependence. They might fight wars across the 9 realms, shatter mountains with their weapons, or call storms with a single word. But without Idun and her apples, they would be left to the same slow decay as mortals. In these threads lay the shape of the coming story. Threads of trust, opportunity, hunger, and dependence. Threads that would soon knot into a snare. For now they wove together in uneasy harmony. Idun smiled when Loki teased her. Loki traded banter over Thor over cups of mead. Thiazi watched the horizon from his frozen mountain, the wind carrying whispers of what was to come. The gods feasted and drank, oblivious to how tightly their fates were already being drawn together. And somewhere, in the stillness between heartbeats, the first pull on those threads began.
The day was bright in Asgard, yet the air carried a strange weight, as if the sunlight was a little too golden, the breeze a little too still. Idun walked among the gardens, her basket brimming with the apples, whose glow outshone even the petals of Freya's most prized blossoms. She hummed softly to herself, unaware that she was being watched, not by one pair of eyes, but by 2, each with their own designs. Loki was the first to step from the shade. His smile was easy, the kind that warmed the skin, though beneath it there was a flicker of something sharper. He approached with the fluid grace of one who knows the rhythm of another's heartbeat before they do. Idun, he said, her name rolling from his tongue as though it were a rare wine. Do you ever wonder if the apples you guard so dearly are truly the finest in the 9 realms? Her brows arched slightly, a glimmer of amusement in her green eyes. I have no cause to doubt them, Loki. They are as the gods need them, pure, perfect, and enduring. Perfect, he murmured, drawing a slow circle in the air with one long finger, until you see what lies beyond the walls of Asgard. I have heard whispers of apples so luminous they make yours seem pale. Apples that grow wild, untamed, in a grove hidden deep in the mountains. No hand to guard them, no walls to protect them, only the wind and the sun to shape their sweetness. Idun tilted her head, the idea as foreign as it was impossible. If such a grove exists, why have I not heard of it? Because, Loki said, stepping closer, lowering his voice until it brushed against her ear like a secret. Because the gods would keep you from knowing. If you were to taste them, to see their perfection with your own eyes, you might never look at your own basket the same way again. And perhaps his words lingered, a thread left unknotted, inviting her curiosity to tie it.
She should have turned away then. She should have laughed at him and returned to her duties. But Loki's eyes held a promise, one that wasn't about apples at all. It was about discovery, about stepping beyond the safety of the walls, about tasting something forbidden. "Show me," she said, the two words escaping her lips before she could weigh them. Loki's smile deepened. Of course. Far to the north, the mountains of Jotunheim cut into the sky like blades. There, in the thin air that smelled of frost and stone, Thiazi waited. He had shaped his plan with the precision of an archer's aim, and now he was ready to loose the arrow. Disguised in the form of a vast eagle, his wings stretched wide, he watched the path Loki would take. The wind whispered of his hunger. It was not the hunger of a starving man, but the hunger of possession, the need to hold what others desire, to keep it locked away for his own pleasure. The golden apples, yes, but more than that, the light that Idun carried without knowing it. He imagined her smile frozen into silence, her laughter caged. The thought filled him with a dark satisfaction. They walked beyond Asgard's gates, Idun holding her basket, Loki guiding her with smooth steps and smoother words. He spoke of the grove as if it were a place touched by the gods themselves, where fruit hung heavy with the very essence of youth. The path grew narrower, the air cooler. It was there on a stretch of open ground between forest and mountain that the shadow fell over them. The wind rose suddenly, the beat of enormous wings shaking the air. Idun gasped as the eagle descended, its talons closing around her with terrifying strength. The basket fell from her hands, apples scattering like drops of sunlight on the earth.
"Loki!" she cried. But the trickster had already stepped back, his expression unreadable, neither joy nor guilt, only the stillness of someone watching a game move into its next stage. Thiazi's wings carried them higher, the world below shrinking to a blur of green and gold. Idun struggled, but the eagle's grip was unyielding.
The cold bit into her skin, the air thinning until her breath came in quick, shallow pulls. The mountains loomed closer. When Thjazi landed, it was on a ledge carved into a cliff face, the mouth of a cavern yawning behind him. The moment her feet touched the ground, he shed the eagle's form, standing before her as a giant of frost and shadow. "You are mine now," he said, his voice deep enough to make the stones tremble. "And through you, so is the youth of the gods." Idun's heart pounded, fear warring with fury. "You cannot keep me here. They will come for me." "They may try," he replied, stepping closer, his eyes catching the light like ice over deep water. In Asgard, the absence of Idun was felt within hours. At first, it was no more than a strange restlessness. The air seemed heavier, the colors less vivid. By the second day, the change was visible. Odin's step slowed, the lines on his face deepened. Freya's skin lost the luster of dawn, her beauty still great, but no longer untouched. Thor's hands felt the weight of Mjolnir as he had not in centuries. The gods whispered in private corridors, their voices tight with unease. It was not only their bodies that were changing, it was the creeping awareness of vulnerability, the shiver of knowing that time was no longer an enemy held at bay. Without the apples, youth slipped from them like water through open fingers. Strength waned, the ease of movement became effort, and desire itself, both given and received, began to dim. The hall where once they feasted rang less with laughter, more with the quiet scraping of cutlery and the sighs of those remembering better days. They spoke Idun's name often, now with urgency rather than casual affection. Some cursed the silence of the gates, others began to suspect treachery. Loki, of course, played his part well, tilting his head, speaking of how mysterious her disappearance was, his eyes never revealing the truth he held close. In the mountains, Idun sat in the dim light of Thjatsi's cavern, her hands empty. The apples were gone, stored somewhere she could not see, their golden glow replaced by the cold gleam of frost. She wrapped her arms around herself, not from the chill, but from the hollow ache of separation. It was not only her body that missed the gardens of Asgard, the warmth of the gods, the scent of mead and fire. It was the bond. Each day, Thjatsi would appear, speaking to her not as a guest, but as a possession. He brought her food, not kindness. He admired her beauty in the way a collector admires a rare gem, valuing it for its rarity, not for its life. Yet even here, even caged in stone and ice, Idun's light did not fade. It was softer, quieter, but it remained. And Thjatsi, for all his power, could not help but notice that this was a light no apple could give him. In Asgard, the gods withered. In Jotunheim, the keeper of youth sat in silence. Between them stretched a widening gulf
of absence, and in that gulf desire twisted into something dangerous on all sides.
The cavern had no warmth. The air was still, the stone cold beneath her bare feet, and the only sound was the slow, deliberate drip of water somewhere deep within the mountain. Idun sat in the half-light, her hands folded in her lap, staring at nothing. The golden apples were gone. Without their glow, the space felt stripped of life. She could almost feel the connection fraying, the gentle hum of their magic that had always been with her, now reduced to a faint echo, fading with each day. The gods must be withering. She could picture it. Odin's proud shoulders bowing under an invisible weight, Freyja's luminous beauty dimming like a sunset obscured by clouds, Thor's booming laughter falling silent. Her chest ached with the thought, but it was more than guilt. She missed them. She missed the pulse of Asgard's life, the warmth of the great hall, the way the gardens smelled in the early morning when the apples caught the first light. Sometimes she closed her eyes and imagined herself walking the winding paths between the flower beds, the grass cool beneath her feet, the breeze lifting her hair. She could almost hear the laughter of the gods, feel the brush of a hand as someone reached for an apple from her basket. But the moment she opened her eyes, the vision shattered, leaving her with nothing but frost and stone. Thjaxi came and went, his towering figure filling the cavern's entrance when he returned from his hunts. His presence was oppressive, the way a storm is oppressive, power held in restraint, ready to break. He spoke little, and when he did, it was not to comfort. He would sometimes look at her as though measuring how much of her light remained, as if her radiance were a fire he could tend or smother at will. On the 12th day, the sound came. A faint rustle, so soft she thought it was her mind inventing hope. But then it grew. Feathers brushing against stone, a light, deliberate scraping. She looked toward the shadows and saw him. Loki. He was not the Loki she remembered from the gardens. His hair was wind-tossed, his face shadowed, his eyes sharpened by urgency. He crouched low, his fingers pressed to his lips in silent command. She should have shouted, should have demanded why he had led her here, why he had betrayed her trust. But the sight of him, the familiarity of someone from her world, broke her restraint. Her breath caught in her throat, and the sound that escaped her was not anger, but something closer to relief. He stepped to her quickly, his hands brushing against her wrists, his touch warmer than she expected in this place of ice. "No time," he murmured, his voice low and tense. "We have to leave now." Her eyes searched his face, finding no trace of the smirk that usually lingered there. Whatever had driven him here, it was not mischief, it was need. "How?" she asked. though she was already rising to her feet. Loki's hand tightened around hers, and he pulled something from the shadows, a cloak of shimmering feathers, black and gray, each one shifting like liquid shadow. "Freya's falcon cloak," he said. "It will carry us both, but you must hold to me no matter what happens." She hesitated only for a breath before stepping into the circle of his arms. His body was lean but strong, the muscles in his shoulders coiling beneath her hands. He drew the cloak around them both, and the world shifted. The transformation was dizzying. One moment she stood on stone, the next the cavern floor dropped away as wings burst outward from their joined form. The air rushed past her, cold and sharp, filling her lungs like lightning. She clung to Loki, feeling the steady rhythm of his heart against her chest, the beat of his wings like a great drum in the air. The wind tangled her hair, pulled at her clothes, but she held tighter, burying her face against the curve of his neck, where his warmth fought the icy currents. They cleared the cliff, the jagged peaks of Jotunheim stretching endlessly around them. Below, the world was a tapestry of white and gray, vast and unforgiving. But above was freedom, an expanse of pale blue that promised escape.
And then the shadow fell. Thiazi's cry split the air, a terrible, piercing sound that echoed across the mountains. The beat of his wings was heavier, faster, the wind shifting under the force of his pursuit. Idun looked over Loki's shoulder and saw him, larger than she remembered, his eagle form blotting out the light as he closed the distance. "Hold on," Loki hissed, and the cloak surged forward, each stroke of the wings slicing through the air. The chase was breathless, the space between hunter and prey shrinking and stretching with every twist through the mountain passes. The air grew thinner, colder, until Idun's fingers ached from gripping so tightly. Thiazi dove, the rush of his passage sending a blast of air that nearly wrenched her from Loki's grasp. She gasped, her nails digging into him, feeling the rapid thud of his heart against her palm. He shifted sharply, skimming so close to the rock face that snow burst into the air in glittering shards. The sound of the wind roared in her ears, but beneath it she could hear the steady beat of Loki's breath, the fierce control in every movement. The heat of him was her anchor in the cold. Below them the land began to change, the white giving way to the greens and golds of Midgard's forests. The air softened, filled with the scent of earth and leaves, but there was no time to savor it. Thiazi's shadow still clung to them, relentless. Idun's eyes stung from the wind, but she refused to close them. She would not return to that cavern. She would not be caged again. Ahead, the shimmer of Asgard's walls came into view, glowing faintly against the horizon. Loki's arms tightened around her. "Almost there," he said. The words strained, as if speaking pulled at the last of his strength. The gates were opening. She could see them. Odin, Thor, Freya gathered in the distance, their forms wavering in the sunlight like heat on stone. Hope flared, sharp and bright in her chest. But Thiazi's cry came again, closer now, and the cold of his presence wrapped around them like a threat. Loki dove. The ground rushed up to meet them, the walls of Asgard rising higher and higher. And then, at the very last breath before the gates, the great shadow passed over them one final time and was met with fire. From the ramparts, spears of flame leapt into the sky, the heat scorching the air. Thiazi veered sharply, his wings faltering under the assault. Loki's wings beat furiously, carrying them through the gates in a final burst of motion before folding inward. They landed hard, the transformation unraveling in a rush of heat and dizziness. Idun stumbled, catching herself against Loki's chest, her breath coming fast. Around them, the gods closed in, their faces a blend of relief and something unspoken. She straightened, her gaze lingering on Loki's for a moment longer than necessary. There were no words, not yet. Only the shared rhythm of their breathing, the pulse of hearts still racing from the escape, and the silent knowledge of how close they had come to being too late.
The gates had not fully closed when the roar of wings returned. Thiazi, relentless, came sweeping down from the sky, his shadow stretching long across the golden streets of Asgard. His talons glinted in the light, each beat of his vast wings scattering dust and sparks from the air. Loki stepped in front of Idun without thinking, the edge of the feather cloak still clutched in his hands, its magic ebbing but not yet gone. Around them, the gods moved into formation, Thor lifting Mjolnir with a low, dangerous hum, Odin's single eye narrowing as he called for the flames to rise again. The sky blazed. From the ramparts, torrents of fire and spears of pure light surged upward, meeting Thiazi in a dazzling collision. He wheeled in the air, feathers catching flame, his cry splitting the clouds, the heat shimmering, wrapping the moment in a haze, as if the very air were bending under the clash of power and desperation. He dove once more, but this time his flight faltered. One wing, charred and smoking, dragged unevenly in the wind. He fought against it, but each movement only brought him lower, closer to the ground. The fire licked at him again, curling around his great form in twisting ribbons of gold and red. His final cry echoed like a fractured promise before his body crashed beyond the gates, hidden from sight. Silence followed, deep, echoing, as though the world itself had exhaled. Only then did Idun realize she had been holding her breath. The gods surrounded her, their eyes not on the enemy, but on what she held in her arms. At some point during the flight, she did not remember when, she had gathered the apples again. They were warm against her, their skins shimmering softly as though they held captured sunlight. She cradled them close, feeling their hum of life, the delicate vibration that seemed to travel into her own heartbeat.
One by one, the gods stepped forward. Freya's fingers trembled slightly as she lifted an apple from the basket, holding it close before taking the first bite. The change was instant. The pallor of her cheeks flushed with warmth, the faint lines around her eyes smoothing as if kissed away by time. Her lips curved in a slow, almost languid smile, and she closed her eyes to savor the taste. Odin followed, his large hands unexpectedly gentle as he took his share. The light that spread through him was more than physical. His gaze sharpened, the weariness in his shoulders melting into something keen and unshakable. Thor's laughter returned in a great rolling wave after his bite, his hair catching the sun as if newly burnished. It was not just youth that the apples restored. It was vigor, allure, the ineffable glow of being wholly alive. The way they moved, the way they breathed, it all shifted, their presence fuller, more magnetic. Asgard itself seemed to respond, the air sweeter, the light warmer, the golden towers gleaming as if freshly polished by the sun. Idun stood in the center of it all, the heart of the renewal. Their gratitude washed over her like a tide, touches to her shoulder, fleeting brushes of her fingers over her hand, lingering glances that said more than words. Her absence had been a void, her return was a flood. Yet her gaze kept drifting back to Loki. He stood apart from the circle, his expression unreadable, the last embers of urgency still in his posture. There was no apple in his hand. Instead, his eyes rested on her, and for a moment the noise of celebration faded. She crossed to him slowly, the sound of her bare feet soft against the stones. When she reached him, she held out an apple without a word. His eyes flicked from the fruit to her face, and something unguarded passed between them. Regret, perhaps, or the faintest trace of something warmer. He took it. His fingers brushed hers just for a breath longer than necessary, and she felt the ghost of his earlier grip, the fierce, unyielding hold he had on her in the sky. Around them the gods feasted, their laughter ringing against the walls, but here between the two of them the air was quiet. She knew his part in her capture, knew the deceit that had led her into Theages' hands, and yet she also knew the feel of the wind between them, the way he had flown without falter, the way he had looked at her in the cavern, not as prey, but as something he could not leave behind.
He bit into the apple. The light that touched him was subtler than with the others, but it was there, in the sharper line of his jaw, the renewed gleam in his eyes, the curve of his smile that finally returned. When he turned away, she let him go. The day waned into evening, the sky painted in streaks of amber and rose. Music rose from the great hall, the scent of honey and roasted meat drifting through the air. The gods gathered there in celebration, their voices loud and joyous, cups overflowing. Idun joined them for a while, her basket of apples ever at her side, the source of their vitality and delight. Yet as the night deepened, she slipped away to the gardens. The moonlight silvered the leaves, and the golden apples glowed faintly in its touch. She set them gently in their place among the branches, their magic seeping back into the roots and soil. The trees themselves seemed to sigh in relief. A breeze moved through her hair, carrying the lingering scent of feathers and wind. She closed her eyes, letting it wash over her, and in that quiet she understood something. The apples did not only belong to the gods, they were part of her, as much as the pulse in her veins. Their magic was not just about eternal beauty or the power to hold off time. It was about connection, about the shared vitality that passed between hands, lips, and hearts. She had been taken, yes, but she had also been sought, risked for, and returned. The garden was still when she opened her eyes again. Somewhere in the distance, laughter spilled from the great hall. But here the world was hushed and alive. She reached out, brushing her fingers over the smooth skin of an apple still on the branch, and felt the same warmth she had carried in the cavern, waiting, patient, unbroken. Tomorrow the gods would come to her again, their eyes bright and greedy with youth. She would give it to them as always. But tonight she allowed herself to simply be, neither captive nor savior, just Idun, keeper of the light, breathing in the scent of her own freedom.
In the quiet after the feast, when the echoes of laughter have faded into the soft breathing of Asgard's sleeping halls, a deeper truth lingers. The golden apples still hang upon their boughs, glowing like captive stars, each one a promise that can both soothe and unsettle. They are beautiful, not because they last forever, but because they defy the slow unraveling that time demands of all things. In their skin lies the illusion that beauty can be held, that vigor can be preserved without cost. Yet the gods, in their glory, know the truth they would never speak aloud, that without these apples they would fade, and the splendor they so casually wear would crumble into something fragile, mortal, and unfamiliar. It is in that unspoken fear that desire is born. Desire is not a polite thing. It is hungry, restless, unblinking. It can dress itself in reverence, as when the gods approach Idun with soft voices and grateful hands, but beneath the courtesy lies the same pulse that drove Thiazi from his icy halls, the craving to claim what cannot truly be owned. The hunger is the same in all who taste the fruit, whether they bite with love, with greed, or with desperation. Perhaps that is why the apples glow. They are not merely alive, they respond to the touch, to the need in the one who reaches for them. A god's hand wraps around them, and they warm as though listening. They dissolve on the tongue, releasing sweetness that is almost unbearable, because it carries with it the memory of a future without them. Every bite is both a renewal and a warning. Idun knows this better than anyone. She has seen the way eyes change in her presence, the way they linger a heartbeat too long, the way they soften or sharpen depending on whether her basket is full. They do not desire her only for herself,
but for the promise she carries. And yet, this does not make her bitter. If anything, it makes her careful.
She remembers Thiazi's grip, not just the pain, but the intent behind it. He did not see her as a goddess with a mind and will of her own. To him, she was a vessel for the magic he wanted to hold, to hide away in some dark place where only he could taste its light. There was no tenderness in that hunger, only the cold certainty of possession. And still she wonders, was there, in some shadowed corner of his heart, the same awe the gods feel when the sweetness of the apples dissolves on their tongues? Did he, even for an instant, marvel at her before seeking to own her? The thought is a dangerous one, and she lets it drift away like a leaf on the surface of a stream. Loki is more complicated. With him, the hunger is veiled, softened by charm and quicksilver words. He is a trickster, but also a savior, both her captor's accomplice and the one who risked fire and storm to bring her home. She does not pretend to know which side of him is more true. But when his fingers brushed hers over the apple, she felt a heat that was not entirely the magic of the fruit. Desire, she has learned, is not always violent. Sometimes it is a brush of fingertips, a shared glance that says more than 100 words. Sometimes it is the knowledge that one could take and the choice not to. The gods will always come to her. They will smile, offer thanks, sometimes speak of other matters to hide the urgency in their eyes. She will always give. The apples are not hers to keep. They are hers to tend, to offer, to ensure that the song of Asgard continues in voices bright and unbroken. And yet each time she places one in another's palm, she feels the weight of the exchange. Beauty is not free. Vitality is not infinite. They flow through her like water, and she is both the river and the one who cups the drink for others. In the stillness of the garden, she often asks herself the question that no one dares voice aloud. Is youth a gift to protect, or a temptation that will always drive others to reach beyond their place? She does not yet know the answer. Perhaps it is both. Perhaps the gift is only truly a gift because it tempts, because it awakens in the heart that mix of gratitude and longing that makes life burn more brightly. She thinks of mortals far below the walls of Asgard, who grow old without her touch, who love and desire without the promise of her apples. Their beauty fades, but in that fading there is something different, something fierce and human and unrepeatable. They cling to moments because they know they cannot hold them forever. There is a kind of magic in that, too. The gods do not live with such urgency, and yet, when the basket is empty, when her absence has stretched into days, and the first whispers of fear creep in, she sees it in their eyes, that same mortal sharpness, that sudden awareness that they are not untouchable. It humbles them, and perhaps, in some secret way,
It makes them love the apples even more. The night deepens. A wind moves through the branches, stirring the leaves so they catch the moonlight like small silver flames. The apples sway, golden against the dark, each one holding the light that will not fade until it is chosen, plucked, consumed. She walks among them, her fingertips brushing against the smooth, cool skin. She can feel the faint pulse of life beneath each one, a steady rhythm that seems to echo her own. It would be so easy to imagine keeping them all for herself, to let the gods taste time for what it truly is. But she knows she will never do it. The hunger is part of the bargain. Without it, the gift would lose its meaning. She pauses beneath the largest branch, where the oldest apple hangs, untouched. It gleams like a drop of captured dawn, and for a moment she imagines someone, god or mortal, lifting it from the branch and holding it as Thiazi once held her, as Loki once held her wrist in the storm. Would they cherish it, or would they guard it jealously, hiding it away until it withered in their grasp? She exhales slowly, letting the thought fade into the night air. Some desires cannot be answered. The garden will still be here tomorrow. The apples will still glow. The gods will still come, and she will still give, and the hunger will never vanish. Perhaps that is as it should be. Beauty that cannot be chased is beauty that cannot be truly seen. Somewhere beyond the walls, a raven calls, and the sound slips through the garden like a thread of shadow. Ethan closes her eyes, listening, the cool night pressing close around her. The air tastes faintly of gold. She breathes it in, and for now, that is enough.